back, everybody, to Vital Psychedelic Conversations. Really, really excited to have Kylea Taylor on the show today. Welcome to the show, Kylea.
Hi, Kyle. I'm glad to be here.
Could you give the listeners a little bit of background about some of your work and who you are?
Yeah, my work right now is teaching this InnerEthics that I've developed that really is helpful in psychedelic work. And I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I worked in the Grof transpersonal training for the decade of the 90s as a trainer, and hundreds and hundreds of holotropic breathwork sessions. And I wrote several books on breathwork and one on the ethics of caring. And we'll be talking about all that, I guess.
Yeah. I'm super excited to finally meet you. You've definitely been an influence in my life from afar. Just, being from the breathwork world, and obviously I've been doing a lot of research in that and writing papers and stuff, and definitely used 3 of your books for my master's thesis. So, just excited to finally connect.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah. You're doing amazing things.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Psychedelics today.
All right, so we're going to kick these conversations off. We haven't done this in the past, but we're going to forward for people, kicking these conversations off with a question. So, Kylea, what do you think the most vital psychedelic conversation people should be having right now?
I think, how does this psychedelics as medicine fit into our culture? When you think about it, all the indigenous cultures had hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years, to get it right, to see what worked, what didn't work in communities with people. And we just have a couple years, it sounds like, when it might be legalized in 2024, something like that, I think they're saying now. And are people prepared? Are people experienced? We work in the Western culture in isolation. We don't work in community. And how are we going to fit in with that? So I think, how are we going to train ourselves to work in the world that psychedelics opens?
I love that. And that's something that we've definitely been bringing up pretty often here at Psychedelics Today. And that's definitely a question that I keep coming back to. And I wonder, how do we really start to build a framework here? And what do we need to know moving forward as these medicines do become legalized, decriminalized in a lot of cities and towns and states? What are the most crucial things that really come to your mind around this?
I think people need not only to be experienced with the medicine, taking the medicine, but also experienced in sitting in the field of people, clients, or a client taking the medicine. And that's one of the things I loved about holotropic breathwork, is you got equal time in both roles.
Yeah.
There was the experiencer who was doing the breathing, and there was the sitter, and then you would change places. And it was reciprocal, and you would get that experience. And I always thought sitting was highly undervalued by many of the participants, because it really teaches you a lot, teaches you what's going. It's like a meditation, focusing on something and meditating on what's coming up for you without acting on it.
Yeah, and I've definitely had some very, very powerful experiences sitting, and I think you're right. Like, sometimes people go, I don't want to sit, or it feels very underrated, but like, I can think back to a few sessions where I definitely had some pretty powerful inner experiences by sitting, and also, I guess, sitting with your own stuff, because so much stuff comes up, right? You're like, ooh, I want to intervene. Yes. I want to give this person a tissue, or, I want to do something. I want to care for this person. But yeah, what is it like to sit with that and be like, wait, this is this person's process, and how do I really trust this inner healing intelligence, as we talked about in the last episode with Michael and Annie?
Yes, the inner healing intelligence, but it's also, what in me wants to fix this person? What am I afraid of? Or what do I want? And what's the difference between what the client needs right now and what I need.
Yeah. I guess with all your years of training and experience with breath work and whatnot, like, how do you sit with your stuff when it comes up in session to not want to intervene or do anything? Because I think this is going to be something that comes up a lot. Like, I've definitely been in circles where people are like, oh, I'm trained in Reiki, or I'm trained in this, and oh, this person needs this. And yeah, how do we really kind of cultivate that inner awareness to not do that?
Well, InnerEthics has a bunch of tools, and the really easiest one, and the one that comes up really fast for you when you need it, is a simple 3-word question. Who's this for? So you have an urge to make an intervention, and you quickly go, who's this for? And see if there's anything in you that is attached to something happening. And you quickly focus on the client and see if there's any indication that they really do need what you're thinking of giving or supporting them with.
Yeah.
And if not, you sit there. And don't, when in doubt, I always say, don't do anything except focus back on the client and attune.
Right. Yeah, I always come back to doing by not doing. I think that's an important reminder.
That's Tab Sparks wrote a paper on that. Doing
by not doing.
And not doing.
Yeah. I think that's a hard concept to really master too for a lot of people. I know just like in the training that I've been part of with Lenny and Elizabeth, like people sometimes go, but I want to do something. There's got to be some sort of technique or something, and it's like, no, come back to yourself.
Yes, and I think that's what people are trained in as therapists. They're trained to diagnose which method are they going to use, which modality are they going to use, because they are responsible for doing something with the client.
You brought up InnerEthics, and I wonder if you could explain that a little bit to the listeners that may not know what that is, or some of your work around ethics.
Sure. First, I have to say what ethics and Western education is. It's really learning what the law is, what the ethical codes are, what the ethical guidelines are, what the standards of care are, and kind of filing that away in our neocortex. And what I learned when I was being a trainer and also in an ethics education class at the same time was that traditional ethics education doesn't deal with motivations. And it doesn't at all deal with information about extraordinary states of consciousness. So when we have a profound state of consciousness, we're accessing stuff in the limbic brain back here. And the limbic brain doesn't really want to travel through the neocortex and see if they should do something or follow the rules. So if we have impulses and compulsions, it's very likely that they become actions. It's more likely that they become actions, even though we know the rules and we know what we shouldn't be doing. We're just not even thinking about that. So the antidote to that and to prevent preventable consequences from misconduct is to know ourselves better. And InnerEthics is a set of tools and concepts that help us do that. And also help us be more aware, raise awareness about elements in the relationship between the therapist and the client.
Could you break down some of those tools or concepts for folks?
Yeah. The one that's mostly talked about in the book, in fact, I downloaded this particular chart and wrote the whole book about it. So the chart has kind of, you see a human body and you know the chakras, you would see that money is the first chakra, sex is the second chakra, power is the third chakra, love is the fourth chakra, and truth is the fifth chakra, insight and opening or oneness. So on either side of that chart are fears and desires. And the central line of that chart represents right relationship. So what the principle is that the right relationship is pulled off track by a desire or a fear in any of these 7 places: money, sex, power, truth, insight, and oneness. And so it's a way, if we're feeling off in relationship, we can go to that chart and say, something's not right in this client relationship, and I'll think about it in between sessions. And you can go there and kind of get an idea of where it might be off, and then consider it and work with it. Because we really have to do our own personal work with transference and countertransference. So in the book, there's a chapter on each of these centers talking about countertransference and transference and giving examples, a lot of them from extraordinary states of consciousness.
And thinking about transference and countertransference, I'm just thinking about as psychedelics become more mainstream, and there's a lot of people that have been either working at retreat centers or in the underground and maybe don't necessarily get training in this. And I think this is where a lot of issues can really occur for people that don't have any sort of concept or training around it. And yeah, I wonder if you just have any thoughts around maybe the risks of not understanding, these concepts and doing your own work here.
I think it's crucial, and it's crucial because these motivations and impulses and compulsions come through, and then you get into trouble. And that's what happened in the Grof training. There were people, not very many, but a couple of people who really got into hot water because they took this non-ordinary state model and took it back and worked with clients with it, and none of their ethics education was there for them because it just didn't work, and then they had severe consequences, and the client suffers and the therapist suffers. And so I'm hoping, this is my hope, is that the psychedelic field, who seems to be really interested in knowing themselves, it's almost a given if you're into psychedelics that you're willing to know yourself, that they get into this and really learn it and use the tools. And then it kind of spills out into the therapy field in general, because therapists aren't taught this. I mean, maybe the Jungians and the people that are doing analysis are taught about transference and countertransference, but in the school that I went to, we didn't have any of that. It was focused on diagnosis and learning how to use different modalities, like family systems therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy.
And it makes me wonder, even for those that might be traditionally trained, what are some important differences here when working with non-ordinary states of consciousness? Because we're not getting any sort of training in that in graduate school. I mean, maybe some, there might be like special presentations or maybe elective things, but I didn't get any sort of training in non-ordinary states. Most of that, thankfully, was in my undergrad during my transpersonal psychology degree. But I think this is kind of new territory for a lot of people.
I think there's 2 differences in working with extraordinary states of consciousness. And one is ethical differences. One is that you have to pay more attention to the usual laws and rules and ethical guidelines because people are more vulnerable and more suggestible. And if you think, oh, this is a special case and I can break the rule and or I don't even want to think about it, that is a red flag. And then there are specific differences, like the informed consent is completely different, because how do you describe what a person is going to go into if they've never been into it? They've never had a extraordinary state of consciousness, let alone experience with that particular medicine. So you can describe it, but do they understand it? And can they really make an informed consent? So there are things. And then there's another issue would be cognitive dissonance. There's much more likelihood of cognitive dissonance when you have a profound opening and your old beliefs maybe are no longer as relevant and and they're in conflict with the new understanding or new belief. And that's when people are likely to have a spiritual emergency afterwards, because their brain is like whirring away trying to metabolize all this new information and put things and file it and regulate the brain again. And they just don't function while that's happening. And they really need time to do that and care to do that.
Yeah.
And how do we, that raises all kinds of things. How do we put that into a system that has 55-minute sessions?
Right.
It
usually starts opening up at 55 minutes.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and also, you know, even if you have an 8-hour session, you know, we've had situations where I had a friend who was in Hawaii and flew over the molten lava on the Big Island, and somehow that broke up her idea of solidity and safety. And she had a 3-day spiritual emergency in which she was prone and had to have a people coming in relay to take care of her. So how do we deal with that? Do we have, like we used to have a Kinko's, do we have some kind of a spiritual emergency center with padded walls and art supplies for that kind of situation in every community? We just haven't figured it out yet, how we're going to deal with this.
I wish we could. I think a big thing with that is like funding, right? Like how do you fund a project like that? And
well, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a special experience, and many of the listeners know this, or if you've been listening for a while. But yeah, I was able to work at a place where we specialize in creating a residential treatment center for people experiencing early episode psychosis. We didn't classify it as spiritual emergence, but it was peer support led, and it was really a place that people could come to for 3 to 6 months and really just be with their process. And the whole concept was to be with them, not trying to suppress it, not trying to like fix it, just really be with people. And it was really special. But yeah, it comes back to the funding. How do you get people to fund places like this?
That's right. In the where was this?
This was in Vermont. Yeah. It was based off of Lauren Mosher's Soteria house, so it was called Soteria, Vermont.
Okay. Well, that's cool. I think I may have heard of it, but I've forgotten. So that's cool. But I was part of a committee for a long time in Santa Cruz that was working to envision a hospital. And this is when people actually stayed in hospitals for a while, mental health hospitals or any hospitals. And while we were working on it, and we figured out a lot of stuff, while we were working on it, the whole funding thing changed and the whole hospital thing changed and couldn't be manifested. So, but we're going to have to figure out what to do with that.
Yeah, and I wonder too, I mean, this comes back to this, your original answer, like how are we, we're trying to like build this psychedelic industry and have treatment accessible, hopefully in the future. But I'm also wondering, are we creating the safety net at the same time? Are we creating that foundation to catch people when there's going to be fallout? And there is going to be fallout. Some people are going to think that psychedelic treatment is going to be really great for them, and they're going to have a really big experience, or maybe the container isn't that great. And we're going to need to think about like how do we serve those people that maybe didn't get all the benefit that they wanted to, or blasted them into spiritual emergency, right? And I think that's a lot of things that people aren't really thinking about. They're like, oh, psychedelics just going to heal you. I mean, this is how I got started in my journey. I mean, my near-death experience, but also it was just a really profound early psychedelic experience that catapulted me into spiritual emergency. I mean, like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. Yep. I think that's right. I don't know. And the other thing is, how do we support the people that are learning to sit with people, because they're not going to be prepared. The trainings that are happening now don't do enough experiential training because it can't be supported financially. So how do we support them? And one of the tools in the InnerEthics toolbox is a peer consultation model where I train people in the roles, kind of formal roles of peer consultation, because this isn't a formal supervisor situation where you're paying somebody to supervise you. And what happens is the people who are in a committed group, peer consultation group, trade being consultants and being facilitators for their time as a presenter of a situation that they need help with. So I think that if we can get that into the field, that will really help. Yeah, because, and people learn it fast and just do wonderfully with it. I teach it with role plays so that people watch their classmates doing the role play in the group and they say, oh, well, you know, I can do that. And they practice it as role plays first, and then they can use it with their own issues.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, I'm glad to hear that you're doing that work. I would love to maybe come back to maybe a little bit more about you, and I'm curious on how did you get involved in breathwork? Like, what drew you there? How did you learn about it, and what was your journey with breathwork?
Well, it's kind of funny. I was director of a counseling center, and this brochure came across my desk, and it never found its way into the wastebasket. And it just kept moving around my desk, and I was really attracted to the title of it. And because I had done a workshop recently for staff, because I had seen these clients come in, not there are many of them, but a couple of them who had profound experiences that changed their life and their belief system. And it wasn't pathological, but they felt they were crazy. And they were worried that they were crazy. I don't think they felt they were crazy. And so I had this, well, this isn't pathology. This is developmental process. And so, but that workshop that I did with the staff coincided with this title, which was Understanding and Treating Spiritual Emergency. And there were two people I'd never heard of presenting the workshop, and that was Stanislav and Christina Grof at Esalen. And I thought, I want to go across the country and study that, because I really want to know about spiritual emergency and how to understand and treat it. And what I didn't know was that I was going to have one. And what happened for me in that month with the breath work and MDMA, which was still legal at that time, which we did on our day off, not at Esalen, but off on the beach, was a kundalini opening that, you know, went on for 5 years of turbulence. And somewhere in the middle of that 5-year period, I got an invitation to apply for the first Grof transpersonal training to be a part of that. And I thought, you know, I really want community. I had been so lonely with this. This was when there wasn't anything written about it. There was no internet. None of my friends or family really understood what was going on. They tried to be supportive, but they was like worried about me because I would either cry all the time or be shaking or mudras or whatever. So I went for community, people who would understand and who could support me and I could support them. And they were great people, and I made great friends, and I found my life partner, and And so, and I kind of felt, when I learned breath work, I kind of felt like it's my responsibility to document some of this. And I became the editor of the Inner Door newsletter for the breathwork community, and a lot of people wrote articles, and I would get good people to, like Michael Mithofer wrote an article, and it would go out in the newsletter. And I wrote the breathwork experience, because I was also working at that time doing breathwork in a residential addiction center.
Were you doing that with Ironman? James Ironman? No.
No. I just did it with myself, and it was a therapeutic community model of addiction recovery, and the clients were in there sometimes up to 18 months. So there was really an opportunity to make a difference. And we would do it maybe once a month, once every 2 months, depending on what was going on in the house. And half the house would breathe, and we put curtains up in the open doorway and make it kind of a place. And then the other half of the house would support them by cooking and tiptoeing around and muffling the phones. And so they all felt like they were doing it together. And then the breathwork people would share with the rest of the house what their experience was. And it was very powerful, life-changing for several of them.
Wow.
And I wrote an article in the other book that I wrote, which is Considering Holotropic Breathwork. I wrote a number of essays about breathwork, but that was about the addiction. I also made up some questionnaires and did some preliminary research about what kinds of experiences they had. And in the breathwork experience, I used a lot of their verbatim notes about what their experience was to illustrate different kinds of experiences that came up in breathwork. So that's what I did. I joined I was one of the founders of the Association for Holotropic Breathwork International.
Abby, right?
So Abby. I did that. Lenny was on that too.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, we talk about spiritual emergency a little bit here on the show. I obviously have a pretty big interest and background in that. But for those that maybe don't know much about that, I wonder if you could describe, what is a kundalini crisis or an experience or just spiritual emergence in general?
I think kundalini is kind of a turbocharged inner healer. The idea with kundalini in the Hindu tradition is that there is an energy field coiled in the lower chakra, and sometimes it gets released by Shaktipat from a guru, or spontaneously, or by something like drugs or breathwork. When you're ready, when the universe thinks you're ready, it does it. And you might not think you're ready, but you have to deal with it anyway. So for me, I think, I'm trying to decide which way to go, because I think I think spiritual emergency comes through what Jung called the inferior function. I haven't read that anywhere. Maybe it's just because I haven't read enough about Jung, but and for me, my inferior function, my fourth function, is sensation. And I think what the Kundalini was doing in the healing turbocharged way was cleansing the blocks in my body so that things would move more easily. So I would feel pain in some part, and then it would go away. And I did a lot of automatic mudras and automatic postures, and sometimes very strange things. Like one time, my my head went around,
Mm.
just almost even with my shoulders, but whipped around. And what I had to do was completely surrender and completely let go, or I knew it would really screw up my
Mm.
neck. But it was trying to do that healing of letting go in the neck. So, and I had all kinds of other weird things. I did automatic writing for a while, and I did this, and then it would go away. All those things would go away, and something else would happen. And when it first started, there was no stopping it. I couldn't say, don't
Right.
shake or whatever. I couldn't stop it. But now I can. I have
The tools.
choice about that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you said this process went on for about 5 years. And I guess, how did you really work through it? Was it being part of a community and finding some grounding there? And
That was really, really helpful. I think continuing to do breath
Mm.
work and deep work with psychedelics was really helpful too.
So during that point, were you ever afraid that by engaging in deeper inner work, would that intensify it? Or were you just really kind of trusting, I don't know, what was going on around you and the people that you were surrounded by, that, hey, maybe I'm in good hands and this might be beneficial?
I think
Yeah.
both. I would have times when I felt crazy. In fact, I had an agreement with my husband at the time, who I said, this is what happens if I get crazy. This is what you do. Send me here, and they'll take care of me. So
That's a good reminder to folks, like if you are, experimenting or ever think you might end up within a spiritual emergency. I mean, that was definitely a technique that me and a close friend have that have been through a lot of this stuff. It's like, all right, here are two people that understand this. Please reach out.
Yes.
Because it's scary.
Yes.
Like, who do you reach out to without feeling like pathologized or somebody wants to suppress that? It's like, yeah, really take an inventory. Like, who can really support this? Who understands this process?
Mm-hmm. There was one guy in the 1984 group who also had a spiritual emergency, and we managed to send one letter a month to each other, and that was kind of it was a lifeline.
Yeah, just to probably feel heard and acknowledged,
Yeah.
and I'm not alone in this.
Yeah. And it really helped that I had a background in, I had lived in an ashram for 4
Okay.
months, 10 years before that. And I had read a lot of spiritual literature.
So you had some sort of framework to.
So I had that. I think that was probably the
guess,
biggest support for me.
Yeah, and I wonder how. I mean, this is a conversation I've had with like other teachers in my life. When I was working at Soteria, sometimes it felt like there wasn't so much of a framework, and I wonder how helpful that is for people to like have some sort of anchor to attach to, whether it is some sort of spiritual framework, philosophical framework, psychology framework, to have something that grounds you, to give context around, instead of just kind of floating out in the ethers and being like, I don't know what's going on and where am I headed to? But having, I think some sort of anchor there can be really helpful.
I think it is, because you need something to normalize and validate. You don't necessarily need a whole system of faith, because I think when something like a spiritual emergency starts, you start really looking inward for what is the next thing you should do, or how to follow the path. It becomes inward instead of looking outward for guidance, but you need affirmation. Encouragement and affirmation really helps.
I guess I'm also curious. I was really interested when you were talking about some of your work with the residential and with those struggling with addiction. What were some things that people were experiencing? Were they able to like move through a lot of the stuff that they were dealing with? And what were some of the takeaways there for people?
This is probably not what you're asking exactly, but one of the takeaways for us as staff was that if somebody really went into a blissful state, and came back and said, I didn't want to come back, that was a huge red flag for that they were at risk of leaving the program. And we had to spend we learned after a couple of people left, and we figured it out, that we had to spend a lot of time paying attention to them. And because a lot of the addicts came from prison, and their lives, they had been living under bridges, and their life was really bad before that even. A lot of sexual abuse in their childhood and stuff like that. So they didn't want to come back. Life wasn't a good place to come back to, and it was a spiritual bypass.
Just
I think
wanted to
some
stay
people
in that realm.
talk about they wanted to stay in that realm. So how can you bring that back as a resource into this life, which is hard, and have both of them together for your benefit?
That's really interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I guess I was just curious and what was it like to incorporate that into? I don't know if it was necessarily a treatment modality that you were trying to incorporate, or just kind of like having this experiential component. But yeah, just integrating it into a place like that. I feel like that is kind of like, I don't know, definitely a little risky maybe for like the mainstream. Like, what are you doing here? But it sounded like it was beneficial to a lot of the residents there.
It was a therapeutic community model, so the program was a lot of cleaning, a lot of doing tasks. They also went out to 12-step groups, but the main part of the program was groups, and there were confrontational groups every night. And I also ran a women's program within the program, so we had women's sharing separately from the men's sharing, and that was really supportive to the women. We did activities. I used SoulCollage there that was where I first started using it.
Can you describe what SoulCollage is?
Sure. It's a really good thing for integration for any kind of work and getting to know yourself. You choose images, or rather they choose you from magazines and whatever. They jump out at you and you tear them out, and you make a card, and each of the cards that you make, a piece of mat board card with collage, each one has a special quality or symbol for you. And then you use Gestalt to talk from the card, step into the card and say, I am the one who, and what I have to say to you right now. So it's a way of actually working with the selves that you talked with James Fadiman about on one of your podcasts. And there are 4 suits. One is the committee, which is all the selves and our personal selves. And one is archetypes. And everybody has a particular set of archetypes that want to work with them in this lifetime. So you don't have to make all the archetypes, but you make the ones that talk to you. And another one is community, and those are the people in your life and the people that are alive who have inspired you. Or pets. And pets talk to you too.
Huge support for many people.
And they talk to each in the cards.
I said, pets are huge supports for many people, right?
Yes. And the cards talk to each other. We had one SoulCollage trainer who said that you put your cards in a box and things happen in there.
Wow.
There are different parts of you. So I have used that with InnerEthics too, and people love it. I did that in Austria in an in-person group before COVID hit, and they were just up all night making cards and working with them. And
yeah, it sounds really interesting. I think I first came across that. Well, Michael and Annie actually mentioned it to me when I was out to lunch with them back in, I think it was like 2014. They were mentioning they were using some of that during their integration for some of the MDMA participants, and they were finding it to be pretty beneficial. I've never done it. I should probably explore it a little bit more because it does sound interesting.
Well, if you see a image in a magazine that calls to you, just tear it out and start a pile, and then you can make a card sometime when you're watching TV or doing something else.
Yeah, I'll do that. I feel like things have
Sitting by the
I
fire.
feel like things have changed. Everything's so digital now. I used to, like, when I was younger, definitely have a lot more magazines. Now it's all digital. I think I need to go out and buy a bunch.
Yeah, I think you can do that too. You can download from Unsplash or something
Right.
and print it
Yeah.
out. But it's not the same as just going through
Yeah.
something and having something jump out at you. But people really love their decks, and we have trained. Jim and I have been running the SoulCollage company for 20
Oh,
years now,
wow.
and we have 5,000 facilitators trained in 50
Wow.
countries, and so it's a
Did
lot of
you
people know
did you
about it.
create SoulCollage? No. Oh, okay.
No. The founder was Sina Frost. She died in 2016,
Okay.
but she went to a Gene Houston workshop, and it came out of that work that she did with Gene Houston.
And so you guys just ended up kind
But
of taking
it's
over after she passed.
she never wanted to do the. She we went to her workshop, and I immediately got it what it was, and how good it was, and I said, "Can we publish your book? Because we have a publishing company too." And she said, "What book?" She famously told that story a lot, but then she said yes. So for 3 years we worked on her book
Cool.
and got it together, and then we published it, and then I said, well, we really should train people to do this. And she said, oh, they don't need training. Then she really decided she liked to do the training, and she was really good at it. She had been a clown. She was a performer, and she did a good job. So we did all the
Oh,
business.
okay, cool.
Stuff.
I had no idea that you were part of that.
And
That's really cool to hear.
yes, I have too much to do.
That's a good thing, but yeah, it can get overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
I guess going back, we did write, or I did write a note to chat a little bit about the Fadiman and selves and multiplicity. And I wonder if you had anything else that you really wanted to add there. And maybe in terms of maybe psychedelics and integration.
Yes. I'm just really starting to think about this. And first thing is that dual relationship or multiple relationship with clients is one of the precarious ethical situations that is in the list of tools in the InnerEthics toolkit. And it is always the case when you're working with a psychedelic assisted therapy, because you're working with a client in an ordinary state of consciousness and working with them in an extraordinary state of consciousness. And those are two different ways of working. Different parts of the client shows up, different parts of you. And it's not just a dual relationship, it's a multiple relationship, because you have many parts, some of which are back in that limbic brain that we were talking about. And some of them you don't know what's happening with a client, and they're coming in, and everything has so much more meaning in a psychedelic session. Every word, every touch, every intuition, everything has so much meaning, and you never know what it's going to mean to the client if you're the one saying it.
Yeah.
And you kind of so. And then if you're doing research and there's two people in the room, or if you have assistants and there's exponential kind of connections between the multiple selves, and it gets really confusing to sort out. So it's another reason to know ourselves as well as we can, and to have experience in these states, and also to trust, to go back, when in doubt, go back to trusting the inner healing intelligence. And I liked what Michael said about the inner healing capacity.
Yeah.
I think that was elegant.
That was something I think he said that Doblin put forward.
Oh, Rick said that?
I think he put forward the inner healing capacity. I think that's what Michael mentioned.
Well, that's good to know, because I might use that. Rick was in that first
first training group.
The month long. He was in the month long also, and in the first training
I always
group,
wonder
so.
what that like. It's always fun to chat with people that have been part of those month longs, and just I can't imagine what that's like. Like I've been to like
Oh,
those week longs, and it's like, whew, like stuff opens up. But yeah, having a full month of doing breath work and being part of community that and like that depth, it's got to be really special and probably also really
it was
intense.
really. And Esalen is such a place for transformation. It's so beautiful, and there's so many energies. They say there's air, fire, and water,
I've
and
been to Esalen once,
earth.
and when I got there, I just felt all this energy. I went to go like lay down in the bunk to put all my stuff away, and I closed my eyes, and I had like all these kind of like visuals. I was like, I got to go outside, and I just like laid on the ground to like ground myself. So I could
Yeah.
definitely feel that. That
Yes.
place feels very
Yeah.
supercharged. I mean, a lot of stuff happened there, right? And yeah,
Absolutely. It's like a little vortex.
so I can't imagine what that's like.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Stan taught us about spiritual emergency, and Christina did too. And then he brought in teachers. For each week, there would be some special thing. And Anne and Jim Armstrong came in and taught us how to be
Mm,
psychics, which was
yeah.
useful, a little process to do that. And Russell Tard came in and talked about his research, and Angie Arrien came in, and that was a fabulous workshop. She was just getting started teaching, and she talked about her Basque
Mm.
training as a child, and very, very
Is that
interesting.
where Lenny and Elizabeth do this naming thing? And I think that came from her, like where like in the workshop we'd like
Yes,
say your name three times and it could be three different names and then the group would repeat that back.
that is interesting. That's how I took the name
Oh,
Kylea
really?
in her naming
Mm,
ceremony.
interesting. I always hated it, that little thing, but I've grown to appreciate it because it's interesting to like put your name out there and hear it back. The group kind of reflecting that, and
Hmm.
it's been interesting to see what names I've how they change over the years. I used to just do Kyle, 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 but I've switched it up over
Hmm.
the years, here and there.
Hmm.
That's cool.
Well, it's an experience of having group
Mm,
attention to who
yeah.
you are. But I loved Angie's teachings and all of her books.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about I'm kind of going back to the multiplicity and selves and some of Fadiman's work. And yeah, I think this is like really important. And something that you said, it kind of made me think about like I guess some of the work I've been doing with like ketamine and how yeah some of the relationship changes once you introduce like this non-ordinary state. People are a little bit more open, and it makes me wonder like how boundaries are important, right? Because sometimes I feel like people can be like, oh, like all of a sudden we're like friends because we're open and I shared this like really big thing, and the relationship feels like it changes a little bit. And I think you kind of do see this maybe within like medicine communities and where you have this like mix of selves where it's like kind of those professional
Yes.
boundaries blur a little bit, and how important boundaries are when it comes to a lot of this work, and how sometimes that might be challenging, right? When we are kind of in those expanded states and you're kind of giving a different sort of care at times. And
Yeah, and spiritual center directors, people that live with their community and who are on a pedestal and don't have peer feedback, and all they have is people bowing to them, are particularly vulnerable
yeah.
to that. So I, yeah, and I think it is the job of the responsible party, who is definitely a therapist when you're in a
Mm.
therapist role or a teacher role, to hold the space and hold the boundary. William Bill Brennan, do you
That
know
name
Bill?
sounds really familiar.
Yeah. Well, he just did his thesis for his PhD, and it was on the boundary
Mm.
violations in the problems, the ethical problems in the subculture of psychedelic work, people that were working underground. And there were, let me see if I can remember what they were, sexual abuse and dual relationship and non-sexual touch were the ones that got most severe consequences or for the client and the therapist. And when I looked at those three, what I saw was that all three of them relate to dual or multiple relationship, blurring the boundaries of different roles. So again, I think one of the key questions to remember is, who's this for when you're interacting with someone? And I got a crash course as a trainer in the Grof training with Tav and I were working with like 45 people for 2 weeks at a time, 16 hours a day. And they were all doing breath work for a long time. You know, there were 2 sessions each week. And they regressed, or they were in that mini spiritual emergency way where they were not that functional or not talking from their adult. And it was our job to be the responsible party and to be very careful what words we said and what we asked of them, and not in any way to exploit them.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and I think
it is.
Yeah, a lot of training programs I think need to have more of this, and I'm glad that you'll be helping us out here with Vital, to explore these inner ethics. And yeah, when you said non-sexual touch, I mean the immediate thing that kind of came to my mind was just thinking about breath work and body work. And for those that might be trained in that and want to incorporate that into sessions, like, how do you do that skillfully, and not create an issue? And I think maybe it does come back to like what you're saying, who is this for? I mean, I'm always thinking about that. Do I need to do this? No, probably not.
Well, I think the idea of having double consent, I forget what they call it, but the informed consent in an ordinary state, really talking about touch and would you be okay with that, but we'll ask you again when you're in that state of consciousness in that moment, do you want touch? Do you want help with resolving this tension in your body? And here's the word stop. And if you use stop,
hands off,
everything stops, hands off. And having those safeguards in place and not changing the consent that was made in ordinary state of consciousness for that session. They can change it for the next session if they want to, and they understand that they might want to, but not in that session.
Yeah, and I think it's probably helpful if you are doing any sort of group work. That's probably really beneficial to be in the group, having other eyes on. If you are working with another therapist, kind of doing that dual therapy role. And then also, I think some people probably videotape as an extra safeguard as well, which can be helpful for some folks. I know probably sometimes scary for the client of like, I'm being recorded, but...
Yeah, I would think, but I understand it because it's hard. Particularly, I've heard a lot of men say it's really hard to know what to do with women or even men sometimes. So,
You brought up just an interesting kind of topic, and maybe we can explore this before we close out here. Psychedelics and dreams. So having a psychedelic experience within a dream, and I wonder what was coming up for you with that, and what do you want to chat about there?
Yeah. I was talking to Kyle about this earlier because I said, have you ever had a dream in which you took a psychedelic and had a psychedelic experience within the dream, in a lucid dream? And he said yes. So he said we should talk about this. But I hadn't ever heard of anybody else doing that, so I was delighted to find community with that particular thing. And it's happened to me about 5 or 6 times, and I really, I take the psychedelic, whatever it is, and I can feel it coming on. I mean, it's just exactly like it would be in a state, and then I'm in the state, and things happen, and I react to them as if I were in the extraordinary state of consciousness, and then it goes away, and I'm back to normal, and I wake up.
Yeah, I always wonder what's going on there. I think the first time after that happened, I had like Terrence McKenna in the back of my head, and he said something, I think it was around like DMT, where he's like, once you've been there, it's like, the map and you know how to get back there. And so I'm like, maybe while I'm in these lucid dream states, like maybe that's just what's going on. I have like this inner map of this territory and I can open up those worlds. But dreams are just so interesting in general. And I wonder, what's going on there.
Well, I think the brain is very interesting.
That's true.
In general, the brain and body, because there's no separation.
Yeah.
I just studied Brainspotting.
Oh,
Speaking
cool.
of integration, I just got certified in Brainspotting, and I think it's a wonderful. You can open up these little capsules of encapsulated experience, and probably that's what's happening in the dream. That's psychedelic. It's a little capsule in the brain, a coex, really, where it's the combination of emotions and sensations that relate to one specific thing.
And after you had one of those dreams, did you wake up pretty disoriented, or?
It felt like coming down from a psychedelic that you have to figure out, well, what was that about, and how can I integrate that with my life? And it was an experience.
Yeah, I've definitely woken up pretty disoriented of like, whoa, what's going on here? Am I still in this dream world? I might have shared this on the podcast before, but it had to actually do with taking a psychedelic in the dream. I was actually in Hawaii studying ethnobotany with Kat Harrison, and really fun. And something that she mentioned was that the Mazatecs would eat mushrooms in pairs. So you'd be ingesting the masculine and feminine. They would sing to each other. And so I had this dream. I think it was like probably the day after she mentioned this. And it was a group of people, and we had these mushrooms. And I was like, we got to eat them in pairs so they sing to us. And so we ate these mushrooms in the dream. But then it started to unfold. It wasn't a very psychedelic dream. It was... I was in my hometown. This corner store got robbed. It's like, oh, my town's going to shit. And then I came across somebody with this AK-47, like with a sight and just pointing it at people. And I had to like take it away from them. Said this isn't cool. And they just kept telling me it was a joke and it wasn't real. And so I wake up and we have this huge time difference from Hawaii and the East Coast, obviously. And I think it was like 7 or 8 in the morning. And so I'm guessing it was like 1 or something, 12 in the afternoon here in New Jersey. And I wake up and grab my phone, and I have this text from my friend. And it just says, town's going to shit. Quick Check just got robbed the other night. And he's like, the whole town's on lockdown. The SWAT team's everywhere. He's like, there's this person threatening to shoot up the school. And I was just like, I remember I wiped my face and I said, am I still dreaming? This just doesn't seem real right now. And I had to like Google it to make sure I wasn't going crazy. And it was like, there's a call that came in threatening to, make this threat that they had this AK-47 and they were hiding out. And It seemed suspicious. They couldn't. They had this like bogus story. They're from like Sweden or Switzerland. Their girlfriend broke up with them, and they just they were in distress. They were hiding in the woods, and they called from an untraceable number, so they couldn't trace it. But the investigation wrapped up like I don't remember. I was still in Burlington, so probably like over 6-7 years ago. and it was a prank phone call. And in the dream, the person just kept saying it's a joke, it's not real, it's just for fun. And I just always wonder, like, what was going on there? It was like I was having this dream exactly the same time as all this stuff was unfolding. And it was back then when, like, it didn't have like a message preview, so I had to open the message, and so it was still unread. So it wasn't like I woke up in a half-dazed thing and looked at it. Just odd. That was probably my most psychedelic
odd.
dream, and psychedelics were included in the dream.
Yeah. Did it feel like you were out of your body visiting someplace when you were in it?
Like it was very, very lucid, and it felt like I was there and very engaged with everything.
Well, gurus are in two places at once sometimes, so I think it's possible.
So it's my psychedelic and dream story.
Wow, that's a good one.
I mean, this stuff always fascinates me, and I always go, how do we make sense of these extraordinary experiences? Usually just leaves me scratching my head and asking more questions of, I have no idea what's going on here, but it's pretty interesting.
It's really interesting. So you have normalized and validated for me.
Thank
you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, it hasn't been a question I've really explored with anybody else, so it's cool to hear. It's cool to hear your experience too. All right, we're going to close here with one final question. And that is, what is the most vital teaching point that psychedelic practitioners need to become skilled and expert in? And we might have kind of explored it already, but we'll close with that question.
Yeah, I think it's that therapists with psychedelic-assisted therapy need to be properly prepared and experienced and know their scope of practice and know themselves. And I think trainings are doing a good job and will get better as we go. But I think experience is the part that it seems like people are going to have to take care of themselves. Yeah. And if they really want to do the best they can for their clients, then they need to do it. We need to do it.
And in terms of experience, I know there's like debate from the research world, and this has been presenting at conferences around psychedelic practitioners having psychedelic experiences as part of a requirement. And I wonder, do you believe that to be true, or could there be other experiences that could help to, provide this type of training, such as like breath work? Or do you feel like people should be having an experience with the medicine?
I think breathwork is a great training, and a lot of it is really good training because you're sitting and you're breathing, as we talked about. But I think if you're working with somebody, a particular medicine, you should take it at least once to know the territory. I mean, this ketamine clinic kind of stole my picture from the map site for integration and put it up there, and I wrote to them and I said, I just please take it down because I've never done ketamine, and I would not feel competent to work with somebody because I might be able to work with them, but I might not because I don't know the territory of that particular medicine.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in agreement there as well. Like breath work has been, pretty profound, and I've had some really, really interesting experiences with it, and some on par with my earlier psychedelic experiences. But yeah, there's those different flavors, and you do kind of get into different territories, and it would be helpful to having, and I guess, part of the issue too, I guess, bumping up against experience is legality. And so that's always, I think, maybe an ethical issue as well as a legal issue for people that are licensed.
Well, it's an impediment right now to getting that kind of experience, but never fear, as soon as we're out of COVID, you can do breathwork.
Which I'm very excited about. It's been, I can't believe it's been over 2 years of no breathwork. It's been crazy.
I know. Yeah.
All right, Kylea, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Anything that you want to close with, any final thoughts? And then also, if you have an online presence, you want to share your website or any events or anything like that coming up?
Well, you said you were going to send people my book. Do you want to invite them to? I was going to offer 3
Oh,
books. To
sweet. Yeah,
people.
let's do that then. Yeah.
This is the book.
Ethics of Caring. Yes.
And, if you would like a copy, just, you can tell them what
Yes,
to
we
do.
will. I'm going to figure that out, and I'll put this in the intro and outro. So you probably already heard it if you're already listening to the episode. So I'm excited to give that away to folks. Awesome.
Okay.
And yeah, any website that people can land on if they want to learn more about your work?
InnerEthics.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm super excited for this, and thank you again. And also really excited to have you part of the Vital training program, and you'll be teaching ethics within there. And yeah, I'm super pumped about it.
I hope I see some of you in there, and I hope you read the book first, because our conversations can be
It's
much
going
deeper
to be
if
part
you
of
do.
required reading. So yes.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you,
Okay.
everybody, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.
Thank you, Kyle.